Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This is his, it's a high fantasy, it's a political fantasy, so yeah. Elantris is the first published novel by Brandon Sanderson. I read this for the first time several years ago. It was either the second Sanderson that I read or the fourth, and that means that it was either I read it after I read Final Empire, but not before the other two in Mistborn Era 1, or else I read it after I had read all of Era 1. I don't remember which, but whatever the case, it was one of the earliest ones that I ended up reading. Either way though, I remembered a fair amount about the story, but I didn't remember everything about it, and definitely not the intricacies of how things happened or how the world worked. I remembered the broad strokes of the story and kind of the climax to some degree, but there was things in the story that I just didn't remember until, or like I was thinking, I was like, this feels wrong. I feel like there's something that's going to change with this later on in the story. And then of course it did. The twists happened, but I didn't remember what those twists were and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of in many ways going into this book brand new. And I think maybe I mentioned that later in the review, so I'm going to go through my notes here and see what I have. Most people talk about how this book clearly feels like his earliest work and like a less experienced writer, and that is true. The characters are a bit more of caricatures than they are characters, and the writing itself feels less polished or practiced, but it's very clear that the world building, the magic, cultures, religions, and the politics of this world are very well developed. Sanderson knows exactly what he's trying to do with those aspects of the book, and he succeeds very well at them. For the most part, there's a few things here or there that are clearly a less experienced writer. I remember the first time that I read this book thinking that Hrathen was one of the most interesting characters, and I still completely agree with that assessment. He feels the least like a caricature of all of the characters. But also I found that Raoden and Galadon, both characters that are pretty well loved. Galadon especially is an extremely loved character in the Cosmere, but I found that both of those characters were fairly interesting characters, as well as Dilaf. Dilaf is an interesting character for sure, and I like this things that happen with him. With that storyline, I do have some issues with it, and I don't think I talk about him in here. So, and it's kind of gets into spoilers, so I don't really want to go over that. Let's see, each one of these characters, meaning Hrathen, Raoden, Galadon, and Dilaf, they each have something intriguing about them. Dilaf's fervor, and especially as a contrast then to Hrathen's intentionality, is so well done. And it makes for an interesting dynamic between the two. The same thing happens with Raoden's hope and Galadon's pessimism. It's kind of like a yin-yang to some degree with the two of them, where they complement each other so well. It's clearly intentional from a writing perspective why Sanderson would choose to do this, meaning choose to put these two types of different characters together. The comparisons and contrasts allowed here serve to help tell the story that he wanted to tell. There's some other characters that I would definitely like to know more about. We learn a little bit, but not nearly enough. Kain is one of them, and then Shuden is the other one that stands out most prominently in my mind of there's something going on here and I want to know more. Of course, that's intentional on Sanderson's part. He's leaving mysteries, leaving questions to be answered in later books in this series or later books in the Cosmere. There is more history to Kain that could be explored for sure, although we do get the broad strokes of it in this story, as well as the mystery to Shuden that actually needs to be explored. There's a question there that is intentionally left unanswered because Sanderson's going to go back and explore it, I assume, in Elantris 2, the second book in this Elantris series, the sequel to Elantris. Rediscovering lost magic is a trope that is always going to be a favorite of mine. I'm going to love it pretty much every time I see it. And the way that Sanderson does it is great, as always. I just can't help but loving rediscovering lost magic. It's actually one of his softer magic systems as well. Of course, there's things that make it work and not work, but for the most part, there doesn't seem to be limitations in the same way that the other magic systems do have. At least, not that we know of yet. Basically, he sets up some rules for how this magic system works, but not very many. It's a lot more. There's a lot less limitations on what can be done with this magic system and how it works and how it can be used. Then there seems to be another series. It's very interesting because there's so many ways that for the magic to work on Cell, and we don't understand them all. Of course, the Emperor's Soul is set on Cell, as well as the Hope of Elantris, which I haven't read, so I don't know anything about that story. I don't think I've ever heard a single thing about that story other than the title. But I have read Emperor's Soul, and that one is set on Cell, which is the planet that Elantris is set on. And it's clear that the magic in the Emperor's Soul fits into this world, but it's also not entirely clear how. That's one of the things that I'm most excited for as Sanderson continues to write, is seeing how Cell works and how this Cosmere planet, I don't even know what the shard is that is on Cell. I don't know what it's named. That's deep Cosmere lore that's not important to this review. It's just something in my head that popped up. But anyways, I'm excited to see Sanderson continue to explore this magic system. Thematically, I'm not really going to talk a whole lot more about what is going on, but I do find Hrathen's arc to be particularly interesting in regards to this. In a lot of ways, he's absolutely correct. Of course, he's a zealot. There's some, well, he's like a very high level priest more than a zealot. But there's some things going on here that are, it's religious persecution for sure. But there's also, his way of thinking about some things is accurate. It's correct. And it's really interesting seeing that dichotomy to some degree, where it's clearly these guys are supposed to be the bad guys, but at the same time, Hrathen is correct in some areas, and that's I don't know, I just like that. But that is also kind of frightening to some degree, to see a character like that with a religion like he has, and see that the bad guys can be correct. And of course, that's part of what makes good villains. So anyways, extra stuff that I didn't have written in the review here, but it is what it is. I've talked about it before, but this is what I consider one of Sanderson's older works. Obviously, since it's his first work, of course it's going to be his older works. And I've long talked about how I enjoy his older works more than his newer. Most of the time, there's always exceptions. And that definitely applies here. I think this book is far better than people acknowledge, and I really, really enjoyed this reread of it. I can absolutely admit its flaws. I can admit that this is clearly his earliest work. But the storytelling style that Sanderson uses in his earlier works works better for me than his storytelling style in his later works. I don't know what that is or how that switch happens, but it's sometime around the time of Oathbringer that happens in his writing, and it's kind of unfortunate because Oathbringer is still fairly early on in his career, relatively, because he's going to be writing for another 40 years probably and crank out another 30 books or so. So who knows, or more, I don't even know. Lots of books. But anyways, now I'm just rambling about unimportant things. Anyways, that is my review for Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.